All right, today we're jumping into a really provocative piece of analysis. It lays out this theory about a massive cultural shift happening in America. The argument is, well, it's that the country isn't just divided. It's been operating under a set of rules that a huge majority of people are only now starting to reject, and reject loudly.
So, the whole argument really kicks off with this stark visual. The source claims you can basically split the country into two groups. You've got this small, culturally dominant elite, maybe 12 to 20% of the population, and they've been setting the cultural agenda for everyone else, the other 80+%.
And here's the core of the conflict, right from the source. It's this idea that one small group decided that their version of how things should be, their definition of democracy, was the only one that mattered. And that single idea, well, it really sets the stage for everything that comes next.
Okay, so you're probably asking, how in the world did we get here? Well, this is where the source introduces a really interesting concept it calls the export model of democracy.
You see, this export model was originally a foreign policy tool. It was a framework designed for nation building, for shaping other cultures abroad. But the central argument here is that at some point, this exact same model was turned inward. It was applied to Americans at home who, the source argues, never agreed to be part of the project.
But if that was happening, why did the huge majority just go along with it for so long? This is where the author brings in a really powerful metaphor to explain it: the tethered elephant.
The analogy is pretty simple but effective. It's all about conditioning. The idea is that for decades, the majority was sort of taught to believe that the cultural status quo was this immovable object. And even when they grew powerful enough to easily snap the rope, they didn't, because they had learned a long time ago not to even try.
So, for decades, you had this kind of unspoken truce holding everything together. As long as the elite's cultural projects were just background noise, happening in faraway cities, on college campuses, the majority was okay with just ignoring them. It was always a relationship based on tolerance, not actual agreement.
But then, according to this analysis, that unspoken truce just broke. The whole way cultural change worked shifted in a fundamental way. It went from being about choice to being about coercion. Think about it like this. The old way was voluntary, kind of like a cultural buffet. You could take what you want and leave the rest. The new way, though, became mandatory. It wasn't an invitation to try out new ideas anymore. It was a directive. You will take it, and you will like it.
And look, this didn't happen overnight. The source paints a picture of a slow acceleration over time, but it was the last decade where things really sped up. And the COVID years, well, that's identified as the absolute final breaking point for that old unspoken arrangement.
And during that time, the feeling of hypocrisy just became undeniable for a lot of people. That old saying, rules for thee but not for me, stopped being a cliche and started feeling like a lived reality. And that, the source argues, just completely corroded any trust or legitimacy the cultural leadership had.
This feeling of betrayal led to the next big phase in the story, which the source describes not as a gentle evolution, but as something that felt a lot more like a hostile takeover.
So here's the crucial point. This feeling of a takeover really took hold when all the new rules and norms moved out of those distant, elite spaces and marched right into local schools, town governments, and community groups. It didn't feel optional anymore. To many, it felt like an invasion. And this right here is maybe the most important sentence in the whole analysis. The argument is that the resistance wasn't really about the change itself. It was about the removal of choice. That shift from, you can adopt this if you want, to, you will adopt this, that was the tripwire.
The source also highlights a key change in language. It argues that the classic American promise of equality, the idea that everyone plays by the same rules, was swapped out for equity, which was seen by many as creating a new system with a whole different set of rules and permanent advantages for certain groups.
So, all of this came to a head and sparked a reaction, a big one. But the source is very clear that the resistance that formed is not what most people think it is. So instead of this single, unified movement, the analysis describes the resistance as something else entirely, a messy, mismatched, defensive coalition. The key here is that it wasn't built on some shared, positive ideology. It was forged purely in reaction to that feeling of a cultural takeover.
And just look at this list. This is what makes it so interesting. It includes groups that,
on any other day would be at odds with each other. You've got union guys and small business owners, suburban parents, and even old-school liberals who just believe in classic free speech. It's the definition of strange bedfellows.
So what on earth could possibly hold a group like that together? Well, according to this analysis, it was one simple, incredibly powerful idea: a shared refusal. They didn't have to agree on what they were for, they were absolutely united in what they were against.
And this quote just sums up the core miscalculation perfectly. The cultural elite, the source says, mistook decades of quiet tolerance for actual endorsement. They saw people not complaining and assumed it meant everyone agreed. And that, right there, was the fatal error. So, to wrap this up, the source concludes that what we're seeing right now isn't some radical new thing bursting onto the scene. No, it's a reversion. It's the reawakening of deeply held underlying norms that were maybe quiet for a while but never actually went away.
And that brings us right back to that central metaphor, the elephant. It has finally tested the rope and realized the tiny little sapling can't hold it back anymore. The tether is broken. And the argument is, you can't undo that realization.
And so we're left with the same question the source leaves us with. It's not if the elephant will keep moving, but how far it's going to go. Now that the old tether is gone, what, if anything, is going to replace it? And that is the huge, unresolved question we're all left to think about.